If I never created another YouTube video, never wrote another email, never created another course, and never taught another Spanish class, if I had to leave you now with only 7 steps for learning Spanish from absolute beginner to comfortable conversational level, this is what they'd be. Check the description box below the video for resources and free guides that will help you with each one of these steps. Number 1, start with listening. Listen and get used to the sounds and just mimic like a baby would. Don't worry about comprehension. Don't worry about spelling. Here's how and why to do this.
So step number 1 is to only listen. Or if you have visuals to go along, like if this is a show or something that has visuals with it, then go ahead and use that as well. Perfectly fine. But we're not bringing in the text yet. Doing it this way helps your ear get used to being able to distinguish Spanish words without the text helping you, because when you are in a conversation, there are no subtitles coming out of the other person's mouth. So it's going to be really important that you have trained your ear, that you're used to trying to distinguish what is being said. And the nice thing is that you can do it right now in a controlled environment without pressure.
Number 2, learn to read Spanish. And to do that, you'll need to start by listening while you read. This is how you'll now learn to connect the sounds that you've gotten used to with the written word. Here's how to do it.
So one of the first things that I did when I was trying to learn Spanish, when I was actively trying to learn Spanish, is to learn how to read it. I definitely consider that I became a fluent Spanish reader far before I became a fluent Spanish speaker. And my clients and students are constantly raving about how reading more is helping them across the board with all of their language abilities. Once you get an idea of how Spanish sounds, then definitely go ahead and bring the text into it. And that is going to help you see how to connect the sounds with the letters and combination of letters that you are seeing on the page. Now, when you're reading for the purpose of learning pronunciation, I do recommend reading silently, at least to start, so that you're fully focused on how the speaker sounds, and then you can start to imitate. And the advantage that we have here with Spanish in particular is that Spanish is a phonetic language, meaning that the words on the page really do tell us how we're supposed to produce the sound. Now, as you are listening to and reading that text several times, there are certain things that you'll probably start to pick up on. For example, let's compare these words.
Justicia, familia, parecía, caía, veía, día. Now, all of the words end in IA, as you can see, but the words on the left side do not have an accent mark on that I at the end, and the ones to the right do. So the words that don't contain the accent mark form what we call a diphthong between the I and the A, and we pronounce them together as one syllable, one sound that basically ends up sounding like ya, justicia, familia. So we're not going to say familia. We're not going to say justicia. No, because we're not going to put a strong accent on that I. However, the words on the right do have that accent mark. They are pronounced with a strong stress on that I sound. Parecía, caía, veía, día.
So these are the things that you start to pick up on while you're reading along with listening instead of listening by itself.
Number 3. At this point, you've picked up a lot about how Spanish sounds and how to produce those sounds yourself by simple observation. Now I want you to do something very intentional. Learn the pronunciation rules explicitly. I'm talking about the vowel sounds, the consonant sounds, syllable stress, and what those accent marks mean. This will complement what you've already noticed through your reading and listening. Practice what you're learning about pronunciation through reading out loud. Read Spanish out loud as often as possible. Let me share my personal experience with reading out loud in the beginning of my Spanish journey and why it's not as hard as you may think.
Honestly, learning to read Spanish was one of the easiest and most beneficial ones for me. Once again, I have to credit my dad for this. Thank you, Daddy. As I've mentioned previously, he had a bit of a head start in learning Spanish. And once my mom and I were on board with learning right along with him, he told us it was absolutely crucial to read Spanish out loud every single day. So at first I was a bit skeptical about this. I mean, we didn't speak or understand Spanish, so how could we even do that and how would that be beneficial? But honestly, it wasn't long before I discovered how much I was learning to understand, how much I was learning to speak, and how accustomed to the language I was growing just by using this one simple method. Spanish is an extremely phonetic language. It shares our alphabet, yet there are only 24 possible phonemes or unique sounds that you can make in Spanish compared to the English 44. Each vowel has only one possible sound that you can make from it. I mean, let's compare that to the English A, which can sound like a, but in Spanish, the A is always going to sound ah. Always, every time. That's just one example of how easy it is to learn Spanish. Once you know the sounds, you can read. Try to pay attention to where you pronounced it differently and mark that on the transcript. So grab your friend, your neighbor, your coworker, your schoolmate, and ask them to listen to you read. Nothing beats a real human being there beside you, helping you along.
Number 4, you can do the previous steps using just about any material. At this point, I want you to get a bit more intentional with your resources if you haven't already, so that you can begin to create a routine. Use Spanish courses to add some structure, build your vocabulary, improve your grammar, and above all, let you see your progress really clearly, which helps to build your confidence. But don't just choose the latest, shiniest app or course with all the promises. Really understand why you're selecting the resources that you are. Let me give you a couple of guidelines here.
Choose your most comprehensive resource and work with only that one. Now, you don't have to throw away everything else and delete everything else, at least not yet. But I do want you to start with just one. And since you are using just one, try to make it the most comprehensive one that you have. And what do I mean by comprehensive? Well, when I say comprehensive, I'm referring to including listening, reading, writing, and speaking in your routine. Those are the 4 fundamental elements of language. And if you're having trouble finding one resource that really covers all of those items, then at least really focus on the first 2, the listening and the reading. That's the input. It's the exposure to the language, getting the language into you, so to speak. So for example, if you're sorting through your resources and you find a textbook that has you do a little bit of reading and then some writing exercises, well, you just have 2 out of 4 there, so you may want to keep looking. Or if you have something that's really heavy with the grammar explanations and then it has you do some writing, well, keep in mind that grammar is not even one of those 4 fundamental elements. It is a sub-skill because good grammar really is a result of having a very comprehensive routine that includes your listening, reading, writing, and speaking. So trust me, using something that is very, very grammar focused and grammar heavy really isn't going to get you anywhere fast. So really try to choose the most well-rounded resource that you can find. Now, take a look at that one resource and determine what else you need to add at this point into your routine to make it truly comprehensive. We talked about choosing the most comprehensive resource that you may happen to have. But let me tell you, you cannot actually learn a language from just one resource. So take a look at your resource and see, what is it that I'm actually missing here? If you're working with a good online course, for example, well, you may have a little bit of all of those elements of the listening, reading, writing, and speaking. But a step-by-step self-study course, as I like to call them, they tend to be a little light on the input side, on the listening and reading. Maybe you're really breaking down 5 or 6 lines of a conversation, which is great. But at the end of the day, you're going to want to expose yourself to more than a few lines of Spanish conversation. So maybe you can use that resource and combine it with some extra listening and reading. Is there a podcast you can listen to that comes with a transcript, a little short story book for beginners, YouTube videos, whatever it is, get some more exposure to the Spanish. Or perhaps that comprehensive resource that you chose is very, very input based, which is fantastic. Maybe it's something that's story based and you're doing lots of listening and reading to stories, like some of the stories that I like to publish on my channel, for example. That's fantastic. But maybe you see that you're kind of lacking in the output. So maybe you decide to add in some writing. If you're just beginning, a good way to start writing is simply to choose a paragraph or so and just copy it. Notice how the words are written. Or if you're a little bit more advanced, you could do some dictation. Just listen without the text and see if you can write down what you're hearing. Even more advanced still, see if you can manipulate those sentences into something new. Maybe get someone to check it out for you. If you find that speaking is what's lacking with that one resource that you're using, can you start by just imitating the sounds, speaking them out loud, working on your pronunciation? If you're a little bit more advanced, maybe you can start to, just like you did with the writing, manipulate those sentences and start to create your own. Whatever it is, here you're just filling in those gaps that you notice that your one resource isn't really covering. But again, try to make it as simple as possible.
Number 5, after working with your resources for a bit of time, audit your Spanish routine. See where you're really spending most of your time. Let me tell you what I mean.
I want you to pay more attention to the amount of time that you spend actually in contact with the Spanish language rather than how much time you spend studying. Okay, I'll often hear people say, I spend an hour a day studying. And I'm just getting nowhere. Like I feel like I cannot communicate in the language at all. But what are you actually doing during that hour a day? I mean, if you really start to examine it, you may find that you're spending 20 minutes a day listening or reading an English explanation of a Spanish grammar point, and then maybe 5 minutes or so working on some exercises. Maybe you then spent 10 minutes cruising around YouTube trying to find a good Spanish video to watch, okay? Then you finally find something that looks interesting to you, and what did you do? You threw on those English subtitles. You did not just do that. Now, when those English subtitles are on, what is going to happen? Well, you're going to be reading the English, and you may think that you are getting all this benefit by listening to the Spanish, but you're probably only going to pick up on a few words here or there, because what happens when there's more than one language coming at the brain at once, it automatically gravitates towards whatever is easier. So really, you just spent 15 minutes reading English. Congratulations. That was probably not the best use of your time. Then maybe you wrapped up everything by listening to or reading along with 10 minutes of a Spanish story, which is great. All right, so let's do the math on that. How much time did you actually spend in exclusive contact with the target language? It was not an hour. It was about 15 minutes. So increasing the amount of time that you spend not studying, because that is a very generic term. I don't know what you're doing if you tell me that you're just studying. So increasing the amount of time that you spend actually in contact with the target language, be this through listening, speaking, reading, writing, that is the time that you are really going to count when you are trying to see how long you are spending every day learning Spanish. I am a big advocate of comprehensible input. If you look at a lot of the content on this channel, you'll find playlists with Spanish listening practice, Spanish stories and conversations. Spend as much time as possible in contact with your target language.
Number 6, when you're ready to move past your self-study routine and maybe your first phrases and small talk conversations that you may be having, use my method that I call Prepare, Practice, Present. This is where you prepare speaking topics on the subjects that you're most likely to use. Let me tell you why that's so effective.
Well, when you are preparing to have a conversation with your tutor or your teacher or speaking partner, especially in the beginning when you're new and you don't have a wide range of vocabulary to grab from, well, you're going to want to prepare and present by doing the following things. Choose a topic that you're interested in or that you simply want to talk about. Ideally, this is going to be something relevant to your life, something that you may discuss with a person in everyday conversation. Consume one or more pieces of content on that information. So by that I mean perhaps an article, maybe a news article or an article specifically about this hobby or your job that you do. You can also watch YouTube videos, for example, about that subject. Just consume at least one or possibly multiple pieces of content on that information. So do that several times, maybe read your article several times, watch your video several times during the days leading up to the conversation. Practice discussing the topic with yourself. Choose a few vocabulary words, again, specific to that subject, that you haven't quite mastered yet. Probably no more than 10, I would recommend, and write those down. So when you're having your conversation with your speaking partner, actively try to use those words during the conversation. And if possible, if you can tell your speaking partner that you're working on these words so that they can also make an attempt to use them regularly during the conversation, that's going to be even better. You may be able to even send them those words ahead of time. So what are the benefits of this? Well, you'll be more likely and more motivated to begin speaking sooner rather than later. You'll feel more comfortable during your speaking session. You will master the vocabulary of certain subjects before moving on to the next one, which is key because we can only learn so many new words at one time. But again, as we discussed earlier, those most common words that are used in the language are going to be coming up in any type of conversation, regardless of the subject. Even your teacher or tutor will love you because as teachers who actually want results for our students, we really like it when the students are clear on their goals, their short-term goals, and know what they want. Something much more specific than fluency.
Number 7, be consistent. Even with all of the tips in the world, your routine is never going to be perfect because life isn't perfect. Do your best to be consistent even when life gets in the way. This is how to do it.
Be honest with how consistent you're actually being with your language studies, okay? So right beside this group of people that complain about how long they study every day and they're not seeing progress, there's this other group that complains of how long they've been learning, as in how many years, and that they're just not seeing the progress that they would like. Now, if you fall into that category, what would really be lovely if you could do is to take a good hard look at how consistent you have been every day over the past 2, 3, 4, 5, 10 years. But the problem is that that is almost impossible to do. We really cannot remember accurately when we're thinking back to the past. So what I want you to do from here on out is to track. You can start a simple language journal. You can do a paper journal. I use a paper journal for language journaling. This is because my whole life is digital. Almost everything that I do is digital. And so sometimes it just helps me to take a step back and go old school and get a pen and paper and write down what I did that day. But you can certainly do this in a digital format as well. You could go as simple as a Google Doc so that it's automatically saved for you, or you could use a fancy tracker or app to do your language journaling, to just jot down what you did that day to progress towards your language goals. You'll find that you have ups and that you have downs. But how cool will it be if when you look back on that journal, you see that even those days that you were kind of lacking in motivation, you still did something. You did 5, 10, 15 minutes of something to advance you towards your goals. That is what you want to see. You want to see that consistency and you want to track it to keep yourself honest. And it's that consistency that's going to help you learn the language so much faster.
A bonus tip: have lots and lots of fun. There is no true destination with language learning. It's all about loving the journey. Let's summarize our steps. Number 1, start with listening only. Number 2, learn to read Spanish silently at first. Number 3, learn the pronunciation rules and practice your Spanish reading out loud. Number 4, get intentional with your Spanish resources. Choose courses and tools that are comprehensive and are going to help you reach your goals. Number 5, after working with your resources for a little bit, audit your Spanish routine. See where you're spending the most time. Number 6, use the prepare, practice, present method to prepare your first conversations. And number 7, be consistent. So, where are you right now? Have you skipped a step that you feel like you really need to revisit? Are you struggling with one of these areas? Are there items on this list that you didn't even know were important? Where do you need the most support? I want you to think about those questions right now. I want to help you accomplish every single one of these steps and put them together into a simple plan that makes sense for you. In my Framework to Fluency Masterclass, I'll show you how to do just that with case studies from real students and clients that I've worked with that I'm sure you can relate to. And I'll let you know how we can work together to make it happen even more efficiently. You can join my free masterclass by going to ericaraylanguage.com/masterclass. Until next time, don't forget to go out and live your new language today. Bye-bye.